I called for $18 to buy my wife's heart medicine, and my son told me to figure it out myself. 4 days later, his mother-in-law stood on my porch holding a manila envelope, and she said, "Don't let him see this until you've read it. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I go on, I want you to think of me the way you'd think of your own father, or the father you wish you'd had, because that's who's talking to you tonight." A quick note before we start. This story contains fictional elements created for narrative purposes. Any resemblance to real names or places is coincidental, but everything it's trying to tell you is true. My name is Walter Nash. I'm 69 years old, and on the morning this story really begins, my wife Louise handed me my coffee without saying a word. That wasn't like her. 42 years of marriage teaches you the difference between a quiet morning and a heavy one, and this one was heavy. She set the mug down in front of me on the kitchen table, the same chipped blue mug I'd been drinking from since our daughter Renee gave it to me for Father's Day, back when Renee still had all her baby teeth. And she went and stood at the sink with her back to me, running water over a dish that was already clean. "Lou," I said, "talk to me." "I'm fine, Walter." "You're not fine. You're scrubbing that plate like it insulted your mother." She almost laughed. Almost. I saw her shoulders loosen just a fraction, and then tighten right back up. And that's when I knew whatever was sitting on her chest wasn't going anywhere until she let it out. I want to tell you a little about where we live, so you can picture it the way I do. We're in a town called Millbrook, about 40 minutes outside of Scranton, Pennsylvania. Small place. One traffic light, a diner called Ruthie's that's been open since before I was born, and a lot of houses like ours modest, paid off after 30 years of monthly checks, the kind of houses where the porch light stays on because somebody's always coming or going. I spent 38 years working for the county as a heavy equipment mechanic, keeping the plows and the dump trucks running through winters that tried to kill them every single year. My hands still carry the record of it. Grease that never fully came out from under the nails. A scar across my left palm from a fan belt that snapped in '91. I retired 4 years ago with a pension that covers the mortgage and not much past it. Louise worked 26 years at the elementary school cafeteria. She'll tell you it wasn't much of a job, ladling out mashed potatoes to 8-year-olds, but I watched that woman learn the name of every single child who came through that line, learn who had a rough home and needed an extra roll, who was allergic to what, who needed someone to just look them in the eye and ask how their day was going. She retired with a pension, too. Small, but it was hers. 2 years ago, Louise had a heart attack. It wasn't the kind you see in the movies, where someone clutches their chest and falls to the floor. It was quieter than that, and somehow more frightening for it. She'd been short of breath for 2 days, blamed it on the heat, and then one night she couldn't get up the stairs without stopping halfway to catch her breath, gray in the face, and I drove her to Geisinger with my hands shaking so bad I nearly put us in a ditch on Route 6. They kept her 4 days. They put in 2 stents, and they sent her home with a folder of paperwork and a list of medications that I read over and over that first night while she slept, trying to memorize which pill did what. Like if I understood it well enough, I could keep it from ever happening again. One of those medications is a blood thinner. I won't use the brand name, because that's not what this story is about, but I'll tell you it isn't optional. Her cardiologist, Dr. Ferris, a young woman with more patience than anybody I've ever met, sat us both down and said it plain. "Mrs. Nash, this medication is what's standing between you and another event. You do not skip doses. You do not run out. $18 a month. That's what it costs with our insurance. $18. And it's the only thing keeping my wife's heart doing what it's supposed to do." I tell you all that so you understand why the empty spot in the kitchen drawer where we keep the pharmacy bag meant something different to me than it would to most people. Louise had 2 days of pills left. Our pension checks don't land until the 14th. That's 11 days away. And every dollar we had sitting liquid, every dollar that wasn't locked into the house or the truck, or the little bit we'd put toward Louise's sister's funeral back in the spring, had gone toward a roof repair 3 weeks earlier that turned out to be twice the estimate once they got up there and saw the rot underneath the shingles. $18. The number that shouldn't mean anything. The number that meant everything. I want to be straight with you about something, because I think it matters to how the rest of this unfolds. We have a son. His name is Bradley. He's 39 years old. He's a regional manager for a company that sells commercial HVAC systems. And he lives 45 minutes from us, in a development outside of Clark's Summit, with center island kitchens and two-car garages and lawns that all look like they were cut by the same machine on the same day. He makes good money, better than Louise and I ever made combined in our working years. He didn't always feel that far away. There was a stretch, when he was younger, right after he and his wife Dana got married, when Bradley called every Sunday. Not because we asked him to, because he wanted to. He'd tell me about work, ask Louise about her garden, and once I remember this clear as anything, he sat on our porch after a Sunday dinner and asked me to teach him how to change the oil in his truck, even though he could have paid someone $40 to do it in 15 minutes, because he wanted to know how, the way I'd known how, the way his grandfather had taught me. Something shifted after Dana's father, a man named Richard Colfax, came into some money. Real estate, from what I understand, some commercial properties out past Wilkes-Barre that did very well for him. And I don't say this bitterly. I say it as a fact of what happened. The more time Bradley spent around the Colfax family, around their lake house and their vacations and the easy, particular comfort that comes from never once in your life worrying about $18, the more our little house in Millbrook must have started to look like something he was working his way out of, rather than something he came from. I called him on a Tuesday afternoon. I want you to understand it took me most of that morning to work up to it. I'm not a man who likes asking for things. 38 years fixing other people's broken machinery taught me to solve my own problems, quietly, without making a production of it. But Louise needed that medicine. And pride doesn't keep a heart beating. He picked up on the fourth ring, and I could hear he had me on speaker. Could hear the sound of a television or maybe a game console in the background. "Hey, Dad. Kind of a bad time. I won't keep you," I said. "Your mother's blood thinner. She's down to 2 days. We're 11 days out from the pension check, and it's $18 we don't have sitting loose right now. I hate to ask, but I wouldn't be asking if it wasn't." "Dad," he cut me off, and there was a tone in his voice I want to describe carefully, because I've turned it over in my head 100 times since, trying to figure out when exactly my son learned to talk to me like that. Tired, put upon, like I was a recurring inconvenience he'd budgeted patience for and I'd exceeded it. "You guys really need to figure out a system for this stuff. I can't be the emergency fund every time something comes up. Sell something. I don't know. Figure it out. Bradley, it's $18. It's never just $18 with you two. It's always something." A pause, and then, quieter, like he'd turned his head from the phone to say something to someone else in the room, and then back. "Look, I gotta go. We're in the middle of something here." The line went dead. Not even a goodbye. I sat in my truck in the driveway. I'd gone out there to make the call. I don't fully know why. Maybe some old instinct to keep hard conversations away from Louise's ears, and I looked at my own hands on the steering wheel for a long time. Thick knuckles, that scar from '91. Hands that had earned every dollar this family ever had, one wrench turn at a time, and never once in 38 years asked for anything they hadn't worked for. I want to tell you what I did next, because it matters. I didn't rage. I didn't slam anything. I sat there until my breathing came back down to normal. And then I went inside and I told Louise the pension check would just have to stretch, that I'd figure something out. And I didn't tell her about the call. Not that night. I couldn't bring myself to watch her face do what I knew it would do. That evening, I was scrolling through Facebook on the tablet Renee bought us 2 Christmases ago, mostly out of habit, the way you check a mailbox, even when you're not expecting anything. And there was Bradley's post, a picture of Dana in the driveway of the Colfax Lake House, laughing, her hand up near her collarbone where a necklace caught the light. Sapphires, from what I could tell, set in white gold, the kind of thing you don't buy on impulse. The caption read, "Surprised my favorite girl for her birthday. Nothing but the best for the woman who's given me everything." 40-some comments already, friends telling him what a good husband he was. I did the math without wanting to. Whatever that necklace cost, it was not $18. It was not $1,800. And somewhere in the last 6 hours, between hanging up on his father and posting that photograph, my son had found room in his life and his wallet for one of those 2 things, and it hadn't been his mother's heart medicine. I set the tablet down on the arm of the recliner. Louise was in the kitchen, doing the crossword she does every night, the puzzle from that morning's paper. And I sat there in the quiet, with something settling in my chest that I didn't have a name for yet. Not quite anger, something colder and more permanent than anger, something closer to understanding. I want to take you back further, if you'll let me, because I think it explains what happened over the following days better than anything else could. When Bradley was 20, in his second year at Penn State, he came home for Thanksgiving and told us, almost in passing, over turkey, that his financial aid had come up short for the spring semester. Some formula change, some recalculation of our income that didn't account for the fact that I'd worked overtime that year to cover a leak in the basement. He needed $3,600 by January or he'd have to sit out a semester. I didn't tell Louise what I did about that until years later, and I only told you now because I think you should understand the shape of a father's love before I tell you what this one did with it. My own father left me exactly one thing when he died, a pocket watch, Elgin, 1948, gold-filled case, the kind of watch a working man carried his whole life and then handed down like it was something holy. I'd carried it in my breast pocket to my own wedding. I took it to a shop on Wyoming Avenue in Scranton in December of that year, and I sold it for $3,800. And I told Bradley the money had come from an overtime bonus at the county garage. He never asked twice. He took the check, hugged me, and went back to school. And as far as I know, he never thought about it again. There's more. When he was 16, he wanted to play travel hockey, and the equipment and the ice time and the tournament fees ran close to $5,000 a season. Money we didn't have, and Louise took on a second job doing alterations out of our garage. Nights and weekends. Needle and thread until her fingers cramped, so our son could play a sport at the level his friends were playing it. She never told him either. She just did it, the way mothers do, and let him think it was easier than it was. I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for us. I'm telling you because two people gave that boy everything they had, quietly, without ever asking him to notice. And somewhere along the way, he grew into a man who couldn't spare $18 for the medicine keeping his mother's heart beating, but could spare several thousand for a necklace to post on the internet. 3 days passed. Louise's pills ran out on a Thursday morning, and I watched my wife pretend she wasn't rationing herself, cutting the tablets that could be split, skipping when she thought I wasn't paying attention. I called the pharmacy and asked if there was any kind of assistance program, and the woman on the phone, kind as she could be, said there was a manufacturer discount card, but it took 5 to 7 business days to process and mail. I called our insurance and got transferred 4 times. I even sat in the truck outside the bank on Route 6, trying to work up the nerve to ask about a short-term overdraft against the pension, before pride and a lifetime of never owing anyone a cent walked me right back out to the parking lot without asking. I'm telling you all of this because I know some of you, watching this, are thinking there must have been an easier answer. Sell something, ask a neighbor, call the church. And I want you to know we thought of all of it. Pastor Doyle down at Grace Lutheran would have helped in a heartbeat if I'd asked. And I know that now. But at 69 years old, after a lifetime of being the one who helps, of being the man neighbors called when their truck wouldn't start in January, it is a hard, hard thing to become the man who has to ask. I'm not proud of how long my pride kept us stuck. I only tell you the truth of it. On the 4th day, a Saturday, I was on the porch when a car I didn't recognize pulled into our driveway. A silver Lexus, the kind of car that looks like it's never once carried a bag of mulch. The woman who got out was Dana's mother, Carol Colfax. I'd met her perhaps 4 times in 9 years, mostly at holidays, and always in that brief, cordial way, where two families circling the same wedding never quite become family to each other. She was in her 60s, dressed the way women like her dress, even to run an errand, and she had a manila envelope pressed against her chest like she was afraid the wind might take it. "Walter," she said, "I'm sorry to just show up like this." "Carol." I stood, my knee protesting the way it does now on cold mornings. "Everything all right?" She looked past me at the front door, and I understood she was checking whether Louise was in earshot. "Is Louise inside?" "She's lying down. Her ankles have been bothering her." Carol came up the porch steps and stood close, and she held that envelope out to me with both hands, the way you'd hand someone something heavier than paper. "I need you to read this before Bradley comes by," she said. "He doesn't know I'm here. Please, Walter, read it before he arrives." and then decide what you want to do with it. I want you to sit with me in that moment, the way I had to sit with it, not knowing yet what was inside. My hands weren't entirely steady when I took it from her. "Carol, what is this?" "It's what I found in Bradley's car," she said. "When I drove Dana to get her oil changed last week and he left his briefcase in the back seat and it started sliding around and I wasn't snooping. Walter, I promise you I wasn't. But it fell open. And once I saw the first page, I couldn't stop reading." She left before I could ask another question. Said she had to get back before Dana wondered where she'd gone. And I stood on my porch holding that envelope for a long time before I finally went and sat in the truck again, that same truck. That same seat where I'd taken the call that started all this, and opened it. Inside were bank statements, 3 months of them, from an account I'd never known existed. A joint account with Bradley's name and a woman's name I didn't recognize. Someone named Kristen Ashworth. Withdrawals for a rental property retainer in Poconos, restaurant charges in cities I knew he had no work reason to be in, and beneath the statements, a printed email chain between Bradley and a divorce attorney in Scranton, dated back 4 months, with a subject line that read, "Asset protection. Ahead of filing, need to discuss timeline." My son was not just refusing his mother $18 for a necklace. My son had been quietly building a second life for the better part of a year, moving money where Dana wouldn't find it, consulting a lawyer about how to protect his assets in a divorce his own wife didn't know was coming. And somewhere in the middle of financing all of that, he'd told his mother and father to figure it out themselves. I sat in that truck for the better part of an hour. I won't pretend to you. I had some noble, composed reaction. I put my forehead against the steering wheel, and I let myself feel every bit of it. The years of the pocket watch and the hockey equipment and the quiet sacrifices, all of it stacking up behind this one folder like water, behind a dam that had finally given out. But here is what I want you to understand about what I did with that anger. Because I think it's the difference between a man who breaks and a man who bends the situation towards something worth having. I didn't call Bradley. I didn't confront him. I didn't post anything, say anything, tip my hand in any direction. I went inside, and I told Louise I needed to run to the pharmacy, and instead I drove to the bank and, for the first time in my 69 years, I sat down with a loan officer named Priya Shah and asked about a small personal line of credit against the equity in our paid-off house. $18 a month for medicine is not a loan-worthy expense on its own, but a modest line of credit, it turned out, was well within reach for a couple who'd owned their home outright for 11 years and never missed a payment on anything in their lives. I had Louise's medicine refilled that same afternoon, a full 90-day supply, and I did not tell her where the money came from, only that I'd handled it. And she looked at me the way she'd looked at me 42 years ago, and that was worth more to me than anything Bradley could have wired us. Then I called Dana. Not to destroy anything. I want to be clear about that, because I've thought long and hard about my own responsibility in what happened next, and I decided a long time ago that I was not going to be the reason a marriage ended. I was only going to be the reason the truth stopped hiding. I told her I had something she needed to see, and that her mother could tell her the rest if she asked. I mailed her copies, not the originals, and I never spoke to her about the specifics of what was in them. What Dana chose to do with that information was hers to choose, not mine. What she chose to do was leave. Quietly, with a lawyer of her own, and her own set of statements pulled the same week, she filed before Bradley had the chance to finish, protecting what he thought he was protecting. I heard, secondhand, through Carol, that the divorce was not friendly, and that very little of what Bradley believed he'd hidden stayed hidden once discovery started. Bradley called me for the first time in 3 weeks on a Wednesday night in November. I almost didn't answer. Louise was sitting across from me doing the crossword, the same as always, and she looked up when she saw the name on the screen, and something passed between us, 42 years of understanding without needing to say a word, and I answered it. "Dad." His voice sounded like something had been let out of it. Did you know? About Kristen? About the account? I knew what your father-in-law's wife brought to my porch. Yes. You could have called me, warned me. I sat with that for a moment. Walter Nash, 69 years old, 38 years of fixing what other men broke, and I said the truest thing I had in me. "Son, I called you first. 4 days before any of this happened, I called you for $18. Because your mother's heart needed it, and you told me to figure it out myself. I did. I figured out a lot of things. He didn't have anything to say to that. I could hear him breathing on the other end, and somewhere behind him, a television playing to an empty room, the sound of a man alone in a house that was about to be a great deal emptier. I'm not going to sit here and tell you the story ends with some tearful reunion, some neat bow tied around it, because that isn't what happened, and I don't believe in telling you something that isn't true. What happened is slower than that, and more honest. Bradley calls now. Not every Sunday. Not yet. Maybe not ever again the way it used to be. But he calls, and 3 weeks ago he drove out to Millbrook on a Saturday, sat on this same porch, and asked his mother how her heart was doing. Really asked, and waited for the real answer, instead of the polite one. He didn't apologize the way I might have written it if I were telling you a story instead of living one. He said, "I don't know how I let it get like that, Dad." And I told him that was a start, and it was. Louise's blood thinner comes automatically now, 90 days at a time, set up through that pharmacy discount program that finally came through in the mail 2 weeks after we needed it, alongside the line of credit I'm slowly paying down at the bank. She doesn't know the full story of the folder, and I've decided she doesn't need to. Some things a husband carries so his wife doesn't have to. What I keep coming back to, sitting on this porch some mornings with my coffee going cold in that same chipped blue mug, is how close that $18 came to being nothing at all. A rounding error, a number too small to matter, and how it turned out to be the exact size of the crack that let the light in, the small refusal that revealed the much larger one underneath it. If you've made it this far with me, I want to ask you something, the way I'd ask my own son or daughter if they were sitting across this table from me. Have you ever found out that the smallest moment, the one that seemed too minor to even mention, turned out to be the truest thing anyone ever told you about a person? I'd like to hear about it, if you're willing to share. And if there is an old man or an old woman in your life right now, waiting on a phone call that hasn't come, waiting on $18 or $22 or some other number too small to matter, I'd ask you to be the one who picks up the phone first. Not because they can't survive without you. We survive. We have always survived. But because 42 years from now, you'll want to remember that when it mattered, you were the one who showed up, and not the one somebody else's mother had to make excuses for. Thank you for sitting with me tonight, and for letting an old mechanic's story take up a little space in your evening. I'll see you in the next one.